Chapter 3. Autumn. Intergalactic Dating, profile match, #574937581. Biff, planet of origin, Maggrumph 5. Species, Maggrumphian. Age, 822. Eyes, furry. Skin colour, reddish yellow. Characteristics, cuddly-ish. Likes, balloons, cute argibraphs, temper tantrums, telling people, I told you so. Most likely to, set self-alight. Broken, planet of origin, hemisphere. Species, Belobrat. Age, 42,374. Eyes, 6, all bulbous. Skin colour, green-ish. Characteristics, cuddly-ish. Likes, balloons, cute argibraphs, temper tantrums, telling people who say I told you so that they are right actually. Most likely to be a swivel-eyed loony. It was autumn. A chill was in the air. So different to the days of warmth I remembered the last time we had been on Camalosian, on our muddy hoon, I thought to myself. Back when things were going really well. Back when life was all about beginnings, not endings. Apparently they were still really speciesist here though, I thought to myself, as I raised my tiny fluffy red legs up the giant steps built to cater for rich Dewsbury giant clients, without a thought to those species like me who were smaller in stature, and tried not to get cross. Again. Not now, I told myself. Not here. Wait till you get home to be angry. For this might be the last time I'd ever see the one-time love of my life, and I didn't want to leave our relationship on yet another sour note. It had been a while since I had seen my ex. That last time he turned up at my new apartment drunk. Well, one of his heads had been drunk anyway. A second had stayed rigidly sober, acting nasty and contradicting the first head every time they'd sobbed and said they wanted me back. As for the third, it had got so drunk it didn't recognise me and kept assuming we were on a first date. It was like all the stages of our relationship, all at once. The mad, hopeful, passionate Belobrat I'd fallen for, the emotionally compassionate soul I'd come to love, and the dry, cruel being who had made my life a misery. I had quickly discovered that the first head was a mask to cover my partner's real self, while the third I was only too pleased to flee. The second one, though, the emotionally intelligent one, that one I still loved with all my red fluffy heart. That had all been months ago. Since then all I had heard had been through lawyers, expensive long-winded lawyers from Camalosian who seemed to like making everything extra complicated and dispassionate, as if I was unravelling a scarf, not coming to terms with the end of the greatest whirlwind romance of my life. The final letter I had received had told me that they needed my signature and told me to arrive here at these offices at a certain time. I was warned too that Brogan would be here too to sign the papers. I didn't know if it was a courtesy or a cruelty that insisted both parties were physically present at the end. But then Camalosians were smarter than Agrosians as a rule, and I didn't want to question it. Even though I had been steeling myself for this meeting all this time, I still somehow got a shock when I walked down the corridor to the waiting room, checked in, turned the corner, and saw him just calmly sitting there. No, not even saw him, not properly yet. The outline was enough. Those 3 heads, each one distinctive. I would have known them anywhere. That outline had been on my periphery for most of my life after all, ever since being a young and impressionable teenage Agrosian exploring the universe. I had been overshadowed by this outline for years after all, seen it in first my dreams and then my nightmares. It was odd though to see it physically here in this unfamiliar setting, still much the same even though everything else around us had changed. It seemed unfair. After all, it came with the same instant pang of instinctive attraction and recognition I had always carried, and it took the whole of my conscious mind to tell my body that no, it wasn't meant to feel like that anymore. Brogan didn't even look up from his paper when I puffed up the stairs and sat down opposite him.
"You're late, Biff,"
was all he said.
"Well, if that isn't the shock of the 25th century so far."
I tried not to rise to his bait. Not yet, I told myself. myself, promising my broken heart that I would reward it later with the best, bitterest, darkest Dewsbury chocolate if it somehow got me through this in one piece.
Sorry, the traffic on the Intergalactic Freeway was that birdo,
I complained, sitting down.
They should every single person who uses that express route wrongly. I hope they get rid of over, not to mention all the leaves that kept falling on my head while I was walking here. What a red planet. Especially autumn. I see why they call it fall here. I slipped over twice.
Phew, I thought, that went well. Thank goodness I managed to remain so calm compared to normal. Everyone else in the room was backing away slightly at my emotional outburst, and were clearly not used to being around Agrosians. We did tend to live a long way away, after all, on the other side of the universe, bar a few stragglers and travellers. My husband, though, had seen it all before, and didn't bat an eye, never mind 6. Instead, the Belobrat just took an unseeing sip from his clearly posed fur tray coffee.
Because humans spoke up to hardy paws that aren't biologically able to pick as many coffee beans as other species deserve a break.
In the expensive end of the canteen, next to the
Belobrat exclusive club
poster and the sign,
Your piles of money must be this big to enter.
as if trying not to see me, as if the act of looking up might make him remember that I had once been, well, not a human being as the Earth expression has it, but an ordinary Agrosian. I know in his mind he had long ago built me up to be an ogre, a master manipulator, or perhaps a criminal mastermind, when in reality I was just a small frail-looking bundle of red fluff whose soul had called out for love, from all the wrong places, as it turned out.
You never leave enough time to travel anywhere.
He said fratly.
You never accept that it's best to prepare for unseen circumstances, that other people can get in your way without meaning to, that things happen. Some things never change.
Oh, I don't know.
I said, settling back in my chair, prepared for the interrogation I knew was coming.
I was just thinking how much had changed. Everything, in fact.
I stared at his unchanging faces. Just for a fraction, I could still see the trace of the features I had fallen in love with all those years ago, hiding behind what was there now. The smiles buried behind the scowls, the laughter lines hidden behind the glares, the kind heart now kept firmly out of reach from mine, behind this frosty exterior I knew well enough to know was just an act, the curtain of toughness that was now drawn again, so effectively, where once I had been the only person privileged enough to know the vulnerability that lay beneath. It all seemed so long ago that I had enjoyed breaking these barriers I saw before me down, to discover the real Belobrat underneath. And now here they were up again, as if I was a stranger once more. Yes, it all seemed so long ago, yet in other ways it felt as if our life together had been timeless. But if I closed my eyes for a second, I could imagine being right back there again, in the time when this person was my entire universe. While I was thinking, the Dewsbury waiter came in with my food. I noticed he'd eaten half of it on the way over to me. Normally that would have made me mad, but I was a new person now, and I wanted to prove it. So I breathed deeply and mentally turned the avalanche of feeling I felt burning inside me backwards, so that it wouldn't threaten my new sense of calm, the way my Malaysian therapists had taught me to do.
I see you ordered for me, I
Said.
Thank you.
Brogan was maybe not so changed after all. He characteristically broke my revelry by smashing his coffee cup down hard against the table, as if to remind me that all the gentleness I had once known was gone for good.
Anything to speed things up. I don't see what's taking so long in there.
He said.
I mean, how much paperwork does it take? I want this to be over and done with, to get on with my lives.
I shrugged. I wasn't used to being the calm one.
They're Camalosians.
I point out.
They relish the paperwork and tend to forget the rest of us don't like it. And you're the one that insisted on hiring them.
Brogan nodded, then studied me up and down.
That's reasonable thinking. I thought you put an end to thinking like a reasonable alien a long time ago. You know, you're far too calm.
He said.
I thought you'd be a bundle of nerves. I mean, you were uncomfortable collecting the posts from another being, never mind coping with something as big as this. You're up to something.
I protested my innocence, explaining that things had changed, that it was living with him that had always put my nerves on edge, and I wasn't like that really, but he was having none of it.
You forget. I know you too well.
Not well enough, I thought to myself sadly, knowing that I had changed and become the person that I had always been trying to be, that after a great deal of anger and soul-searching, I had finally found peace in my life, and only wanted it for him too. I had always been a hot-headed young thing, I knew, more likely to explode out of frustration and fear than I had any right to, and Brogan had always known exactly which buttons to press to keep me that way. Perhaps because he liked it, or because it made him feel smug and superior, or because he couldn't help it, I really didn't know. But I was no longer young, and while my buttons could still be pressed, they were piano keys now that had to be struck a certain way to get me to react. Not a drum that could make a noise when struck from any angle. But how to explain all that about my buttons without pushing his? Instead I let my mind drift off, left wondering how it was that two people who once knew what was in each other's heads so well had ended up here, as strangers trying to second-guess each other. Figuring I ought to do something, I held my hands out, the universal symbol of peace in all beings.
I'm really not up to anything at all. I know I fought you all the way to get here, but now that it's here, I'm strangely calm. This will, in all likelihood, be the last time we ever see each other. I didn't want to end it on another fight. We've had enough of those. I want to honour the past we had together, so we can then both go on and embrace our futures in peace.
Brogan fixed me with 3 hard stares.
And whose fault is that we ended up here?
I sighed. I knew that I had once had a problem with my temper. Well, more than a problem, more like an obstruction. It hadn't been easy for Agrosians, after all, to rejoin the universe in peace after being bred for war for generations by a manic queen who only needed soldiers, not people. I felt the full substance of my ancestors weighing heavily on my shoulders again, realising that the way I had been conditioned and primed to think was still the way I had been taught to behave by those who came before me, to react to anything and everything, to fight first and ask questions later instinctively. To some extent I still did that. It was such a part of who I was. I had, though, finally come to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to be able to change it all in one go, that I would always be emotional, but that I had a power to control my emotions, and from now on chose when this anger slipped out of me. And right now was maybe not one of those occasions, given the added stress. But that was then. I was different now. I hoped. Today, I suppose, was my first real test of the new me, as I came up against my old past, and I only hoped that I could pass this lesson. Brogan blinked at me, as if waiting for me to bite his necks, but instead I just smiled.
Our fault,
I said.
I'm sorry.
I added, for what felt like the quadzillionth time.
For everything I got wrong. I really didn't mean to get mad at you, and feed your favourite pet argibraffe to the Mechion vacuum cleaner. Or use your great-granny as a bowling pin, or eject your prize of the most handsome 3 heads on 6 legs into a black hole, or tell my Belobrat in-law she was squeakier when I grabbed a hard it with an oily hinge, or set your favourite hat alight, while you were still inside it. I'm sorry for all of that, and more. I'm different now.
Brogan looked me up and down.
Are you?
He said, somehow managing to fold all 3 pairs of arms.
Really? You've been saying that a lot lately. But can an Agrosian truly change its fluff so readily?
Yes, I
begged.
I've been working hard with my Eurasian therapist to be more zen, more of a moment, to leave all the scars from times past unpicked, to leave the future uncontrolled, to just exist and come to everything as evenly as I can. I still have a long way to go, I know, but not as far as I did when you knew me. You must have noticed that I haven't been my old self lately.
Not since you stopped being yourself and broke my heart, I said to myself, stopping myself just short of saying it. Brogan nodded, a look of actual empathy fleeting across his head for a few seconds. I almost gasped. It had been so long, and I didn't think I would ever see that look again, almost as if he was proud of me.
Good,
he said.
I'm glad. You do seem not just calmer, but happier.
A momentary look of doubt flashed over his middle and most vulnerable head.
I mean, compared to the last time I saw you, it's like you're an entirely different person.
I opened my mouth to protest. I only had one after all. Well, he had 3. Evolution really wasn't fair sometimes, and I was used to being shouted down during arguments.
Look,
he said,
I'm not here to return to those rows we used to have. I know it wasn't your fault you molted red fur all over the place, or that you snored so loudly. or that you demolish my furniture and ornaments every time you sat down, or that my family is so annoying, or that your family is so annoying. There are things that can't be helped in every relationship.
His family really were annoying. No, that was too kind. His family were insane. Like, certifiable. The mean Auntie Belobrat told me in no uncertain terms that
We don't do emotion in this family.
then proceeded to be the most emotional and out-of-control person I had ever met. She was reportedly on 100 tablets a day to keep her what was considered normal, even for a Belobrat. However many she took, though, it was never enough. I was a psychotic uncle who actually challenged me to a fight once because he thought it would be funny. Most people had learnt from bitter experience not to do that to an Agrosian, but he seemed to enjoy goading me, knowing that I could hardly turn round and wallop the relative of my boyfriend. There was a stepmother who was more of a step-monster, interested only in grabbing money and conning people out of their life savings, even her own family members, then playing the victim to those who had been taken in. Being a Belobrat, she always thought she was smarter than everyone else, and no one could see through her, but Agrosians are gifted at that sort of thing. Of seeing beyond the veils that people wear to protect them, the veneers that help them pretend to themselves how special they are. Apparently seeing past that veneer and pointing it out was considered bad form amongst Belobrats, and all of them had a tacit understanding that none of them would ever dare point out how daft some of their pretences were. However, for outsiders, it all just seemed ridiculous, especially to an Agrosian that was used to blurting out uncomfortable truths and then fighting about them afterwards. Not that my family, my parents, Pow and Wallop, were much better behaved. The getting to know you party for Brogan on our first night together on Agrosia had been a disaster. No sooner had we got off the shuttle, following 12 hours of travel, than my family had decided that they should throw a getting to know you even more party, and all but interrogated my husband to be like a war criminal, including shining lights in his three faces and waterboarding him when they didn't like his replies. I didn't dare let them meet him again. I shrank in my chair at the embarrassing memory.
The trouble is,
added Brogan, interrupting my flow of uncomfortable memories,
you didn't just marry me in a vacuum, but the people who make up my life. Just as you didn't only marry my good parts, the ones that made you fall in love with me, you marry my bad parts too. I come as a whole, you know.
I just about managed to stop myself from asking, a whole what? And instead nodded. My Malaysian art therapist said to me that a lot of relationships are like a battle between your combined light and dark sides, that if you have more light between you, then you have a good chance of overlooking the things that trip you up. But when your lives are as dark as ours are, the light doesn't have much of a chance. I hang my head.
The same here. I remember when my high emotions used to turn you on, when you said they made you feel so alive and special, but in the end they seemed to turn you off. I'm not quite sure how that happened.
Brogan nodded.
Nobody told me just how intense living with an Agrosian would be, that I wouldn't get to have a day off, or even an hour, that you didn't come with an off switch.
He laughed at some memory I couldn't see, and I wondered which one it was. There were, after all, quite a few to choose from.
It seems quite funny now.
Now, he scoffed.
Though it wasn't at the time, of course. The neighbours got quite a shock. I don't think they'd ever seen anyone actually set themselves on fire before.
Ah, that memory. It seemed a perfectly plausible, reasonable reaction at the time. After all, what else was an Agrosian supposed to do when they had got so distraught they come to believe that the whole world was imploding and nobody was listening to them, and they wanted attention, for someone to love them?
I had to get the fire extinguisher and put you out.
Hooted Brogan.
And all that water made your fur go all curly. It was hilarious.
He breaks into a smile that passes across all faces in a flash, and I don't know whether to join in laughing or cry. Laugh because the memory was genuinely funny, now that I knew it had all worked out for the best, or cry because I felt that I had been forced into that position unfairly in the past, and because this might be the last time I ever got to see that smile that once meant the world to me.
I mean, who does that?
Laughed Brogan.
Set fire to themselves just to prove a point. If Belobrats don't go that far, what made you do it?
I wanted to feel warm again,
I said, wincing at the memory.
You'd grown so cold and distant, and you weren't listening to me or helping me at all. I needed some warmth in my life, some comfort, some love.
Brogan was momentarily taken aback.
But I did love you,
he said.
I'm the one who put the fire out.
Oh, you'd already put my fire out.
I sighed.
That was why I put myself on fire in the first place.
Look, I didn't mean to make you hurt yourself, or laugh at you. I didn't know you were feeling like that. Even with 3 heads I found it hard to mind read sometimes, to know how bad things had become for you, for us,
said Brogan, putting down not only the paper, but the barrier that had grown between us, temporarily at least.
That probably isn't as fun memory for you now I think about it.
On the contrary,
I say.
Not the setting myself alight part, or the moments leading up to it perhaps, they were horrible, but the part afterwards, when you took me to Medicus, and looked after me so tenderly, and took me to the hospital and visited every day, when you said that you cared for me, bringing in that awful broth, and those tiny little grapes because the Dewsbury giants had eaten all the good stuff. I love that bit.
Brogan looked uncomfortable.
I really love those moments too. I mean, I thought I'd lost you for an awful moment there. I was so relieved when Dr. Hooster said you were going to be okay, that the fire had only singed your fur. I vowed that no one else would ever hurt you ever again, least of all yourself, but, well, that was a difficult promise to keep. We seemed to be always hurting each other, or ourselves.
He looked sad, and I wanted to reach over and hug him, but decided better of it. After all, it was me who'd ended up in hospital.
There should have been more moments like that, shouldn't there?
He sighed.
It's just, it was hard, you know? At least in your job you can take a day off here and there, but a relationship is for always, 94/12. You don't get to have any distance or perspective, or time to work things through properly. You're just left reacting to things all the time, and we both had a lot to react to.
I know.
I sigh.
It seemed we were forever being chased by something, and sometimes it ate you, and sometimes it ate me, and sometimes it ate the both of us. It was always hungry too, always desperate for more. Life kept taking everything away from us, until finally it took us away from each other too.
I sighed. Suddenly, all this time on, I couldn't feel anything chasing me anymore, and wondered how it had ever got so bad. Mostly I remember the happy times now, the times when I didn't have any need to set myself on fire, when I was with one, maybe even 2, of the handsomest heads in all the universe, and we were laughing, joking, and being loving.
It seemed like a good idea when we started though, didn't it?
Yes, very,
smiled Brogan, in just the same way as me, and I almost gasped at the thought that, after years of living 2 different lives, our brains were suddenly in synchronisation again, the way it used to be, after so long as strangers.
You weren't like anyone else I had ever met. So much energy and emotion. You put everything of yourself into everything you did back then. One small conversation with you and I felt that together we could change the universe. Even your frayed edges were beautiful and you shared them with me, as only you could.
And you,
I said.
I'd never met anyone quite so big. You could fill up a room just with one head, and when all 3 were turned on, there was no stopping you. So many ideas, so much willpower. The whole of Queen Calixta's army couldn't have stopped you doing what you wanted to do. When what you wanted was the same as me, it was the greatest pull in the universe, like falling into a black hole.
Well, what we wanted was the same.
Brogan quoted me.
Is that what happened? That we didn't want the same things anymore?
Our circumstances changed,
I offered, aware from experience that in the game of relationship tennis and point scoring, this was a ball that might be about to be used against me.
Everyone and everything around us changed, and the circumstances impacted us. I'm not sure we changed, really.
I still wanted us to work out,
he said.
That part never changed.
Nor for me,
I said sadly, calmly, as if remembering something from long ago.
But wanting it to happen and being able to make it happen aren't always the same thing.
Brogan looked at me curiously.
Are you sure you're all right?
He asked, a note of concern that had been missing in his voice for many a long year suddenly back in force.
That doesn't sound like you.
Therapy,
I said.
And the management classes. Part of my probation. The remuneration art I saw was very helpful. He showed me how I was compensating for my perceived inadequacies and insecurities with aggression as an antidote to passive aggressiveness. Or something. To be honest, he was annoying me so much at first I wasn't listening properly till the 3rd week.
Brogan hooted.
I bet he had fun with you. What was the probation for, anyway?
I coughed. No doubt he'd seen it on the news anyway.
I may or may not have been seen running after my Habridat boss with a runaway lawnmower, waving my skirt above my head, shouting about how I was going to depuluck him and use his feathers in a pillow I would then wallop him round the head with until he agreed that I could have a day's extension, getting the business figures he wanted back to him. Unsurprisingly, he agreed at first, so it worked. It was later he sacked me.
Brogan roared.
That's my Biff.
No, I thought sadly, the reality hitting me once more. That's why we're here. Because I'm not your Biff anymore, just as you are no longer my Brogan.
Weren't you in the news too?
I ask, as innocently as I dare. A look of concern runs across Brogan's faces.
Yes. Well, I thought that policeman would believe me when I said that I was entitled to drive across the interstellar freeway at 48 nanoseconds per parsec, and that I was the military general returning from battle who just happened to be the brother of the president, who also happened to be doing important work for the Secret Service. I thought they would just accept what I said at face value. I didn't expect them to go and look me up. He was very nice about it at the police station. The mugshot caught all three heads rather well, I thought.
I laughed silently to myself. I could just picture it. Brogan, 3 hands on 2 hips, sticking his necks out and repeating, "But I am important. Don't you know who I am?" over and over again.
What a pair, I
said, laughing.
No wonder people used to say we were made for each other.
But were we made for each other's better sides, or for our worst?
Asked Brogan in a hushed voice.
Some of the things you inspire me to do, I still don't quite know why I did them.
Oh, you had no trouble leading me astray too.
I confess.
Hey, do you remember the time they wouldn't let us into the Universal Zoo, so we dressed up in those argibraffe suits and got in through the back door, and then the keeper tried to milk us?
I laugh out loud and get a weird stare from the many Camalosians gathered in the canteen.
Yes,
agreed Brogan.
Trust us to end up coming out in the Earth's hippopotamus enclosure. I've never been the same shape since. And what about the time we broke into your old school and discovered they were taking night classes, so we had to pretend that we were teachers providing lectures in some obscure language? Or when we were pretending we were politicians from Earth on holiday, but we were in the furniture shop because the old cabinet had woodworm and needed replacing? And I don't mean the furniture, that's what you said.
He laughed broadly, with all 3 heads.
We brought out each other's crazy, you and me,
he said.
I miss those days. Or perhaps not the destruction we caused across the universe. It's a wonder we weren't locked up.
I like to see the prison that could hold both of us.
I laughed.
Even Habridats wouldn't have been able to stop a Belobrat and Maggrumph working together.
It was good when we worked together, wasn't it?
Smiled Brogan.
The way we could take something fun and run with it. Really run with it. I never found anyone I could share that with as well in all the rest of my life.
Same here,
I said.
When you brought out the best of me, I felt like the wildest, smartest, greatest being in the universe had ever seen. It was just when we brought out the worst of each other it all went wrong.
First,
said the Machion waitress.
coming up.
Well, not you,
said Brogan to her before turning to me.
Was I really that bad?
I wondered what I ought to tell him. If I should mention the arrogance that meant he always assumed that he was correct in everything, from what we should both have for lunch, to where we should live, to what I should wear, to who I should vote for, to what friends I should have, without listening to my wants or needs. His inability to put anyone except himself first. His assumption that what was best for him was best for me too. His need to be controlling over every little thing in my life. Most of the time I struggled to make my mind up anyway, so didn't really mind, but sometimes it was suffocating. The fact that in the olden days, when I had fallen for my confident, able, brilliant Mr. Right, he hadn't told me that his first name was Always. That I had spent the entire second half of our relationship dreaming of knocking his arrogant heads together every time he mocked or taunted me, or made me feel less than a full person, thus kick-starting my cycle of anger off again. No wonder I kept exploding. My temper was the last thing I had any control over, and I was tired of controlling it sometimes. It wasn't just him, though. And it wasn't just me. It took 2 to tangle, I knew that now, and I had owned up to my part in this. But he had once had a part in it too. We were both as bad as each other, dancing a dance of love that seemed to be forever treading on each other's toes without meaning to. But he couldn't help where he put his feet, just as I couldn't help where I put mine. The Grosians and Belobrats were just really, really bad at dancing, especially with each other. They were softer, kinder, gentler, calmer species, like Cloundesprods and Habridats. I'd heard things could work. We had no ability at softness, no gentle touch, No caring side to get us through our differences. Just a fire for when our similarities were in line and matched. In the end, we had no trust in each other, for we didn't really have trust in ourselves.
No.
I sighed, telling a small white lie instead of seeing red the way my therapist had told me.
But for a whole number of reasons, we were that bad together, I think.
Brogan went to scoff, that moment of vulnerability passing, but I could see him thinking hard. I tried again.
It wasn't you. It wasn't me. It was us. Something happens when we get together. Some chemistry that takes over and makes everything so extreme. It was so exciting at the start, our relationship. So passionate. So unlike anything that had ever come along before in my so very boring life. That I got rather caught up in all the drama for a moment. But I have found myself again now. And I know it's all right to be quiet. To embrace the calm.
You?
Scoffed Brogan.
Calm?
When I'm not with you,
I said.
just as you're not quite so much of a show-off as you are when you're with me.
Brogan flashed his teeth grandly.
Well, I never had any complaints about this love machine before, baby.
I laughed at his oh-so-very Broganish display of arrogance. Just as his abilities were being called into question, just the way he always did. The laugh was an involuntary action, which made him look hurt.
What's so funny?
He demanded.
You seem to enjoy all the fur flying as much as me.
Oh, I did.
I said,
Very much so.
remembering the effect 3 simultaneous synchronised acts of oral sex had once had on my shuddering body.
No complaints there. It's just the way you said that made me laugh. I mean, we both know that technically the only love machine round here is a Mechion prototype designed for such a thing. That wasn't what I meant. It wasn't your body I had a problem with. It was your soul, when in close proximity with mine.
That's a bit too New Age Eurasian-arty for me.
He dismissed airily, sure as ever that he was right.
Best to stay grounded, I think. To counter what's real in the here and now. Not some woo-woo thing that might be spiritually out there, but probably isn't.
There he goes again, I thought, dismissing a culture several centuries old in one go, to satisfy a point he only half believed in himself.
Anyway,
Brogan continued.
there are enough real things that went wrong between us without having to make stuff up. Here,
Brogan said, reaching into his bag.
I bought you a balloon.
Wait, you did?
I asked.
Just for me?
You knew how I always loved balloons. I filled it with my hot air.
He grinned, handing it over. It was red and sparkly, just the way I liked them. Self-deprecating jokes now, too. Brogan seemed almost likeable again in the flesh, not the monster he had seen the past year or so, when he had been distant and his Belobrat lawyer had been spending me nasty messages. I was amazed. Maybe the extra time reflecting had done him good too. Maybe two people could change after all. I felt confused, a pang of love and concern that had been sleeping inside my soul, slowly growing back to life again, and I realised that although it had been dampened and turned to ash, that fire had never actually fully gone out.
It's beautiful, thank you.
I said, watching as the balloon did what I wanted it to, stretch away into the infinite and discovering its own freedom, but with a strong hand ready to tug it back to land again. That was all I had ever wanted. Somebody that didn't sit on me so tightly I burst, or holding me tight enough not to let me go. And Brogan had remembered that I liked them. That counted for a lot.
I'm sorry,
I stammered.
I didn't get anything for you.
Brogan grinned broadly.
Don't worry, I was always the generous one of the two of us.
That wasn't strictly true, but in the interests of our newfound camaraderie, I let it go. Unlike the balloon, which I clutched tight, while being careful not to burst. He went quiet, so I followed his lead, remembering happier times when Brogan used to do things like this for me, unprompted, early on in our relationship. Being back on this planet again after all this time reminded me of how much of a partnership we had once been. I can't remember why our money hoon, a Belobrat thing, an expensive trip designed for showing off to your new bride, was spent on Camalosian, and why our honeymoon was spent on Earth's moon now. Possibly because Camalonia had more rules than any other planet, and the young rebels in both of us had enjoyed breaking them so much, splashing out of the biggest, noisiest galumphary vehicle we could find, and joyriding at speed amongst the species most likely to be annoyed by us. It had been fun, Harmless fun, I had thought at the time, despite the endless legal paperwork I was still filling in now as we defied society's restrictions together, driving dangerously and living fast as we tried to embrace life at speed to make up for how slow and lifeless it had felt before meeting each other. I still remember how much my pulse had raced at the time, that adrenaline rush that made me feel so intense and alive. Agrosians live for moments like that, when everything was so extreme and dangerous and naughty. Life had been much happier and more peaceful since the overthrow of Queen Calixta, but still there were moments when I missed feeling in charge of my own destiny, as if my life was in my own hands, when war might break out at any second. I knew Brogan and felt it too, that for a moment he held the difference between life and death in his hands, and he really loved the power of it. Yet, strangely, I had always felt safe with him back then. He always knew exactly what he was doing. He was always so in command, so in control. I never had a moment's doubt that everyone was safe from real danger, so I really didn't see the problem when all the Camalosians scattered like skittles, or the Camalosian law enforcers tried to throw the book at us. And being Camalosians, it was a really, really big book. I knew now, of course, that people could have been hurt. But I had been young and silly and easily fooled into trust by the cool, controlled veneer of calm of my boyfriend, when underneath everything Brogan was the most scared and insecure person I had probably ever met, so desperate to fill up nagging, gaping holes of doubt that ran through him like a stick of rock that he would do anything if it got him attention. I had been amazed that we had ever been welcomed back on Camalosia, though it made perfect sense that he had only got the biggest, grandest, most expensive lawyers in the universe to finalise things between us. Then again, as Brogan had always pointed out when an older, wiser me expressed sadness that I had agreed to it, no one had got hurt back then. For some reason that memory of driving at speed had stayed with me beyond all the others, as it summed us up in a way, him in the driving seat, and more in control, while I was in the passenger seat, more and more trapped. I remembered how once we had been the car and the gasoline to each other, as he quickened my pulse, tugged at my motor, and rode me, quite literally most nights. But gasoline is unsustainable in the long term and bad for the planet. Any planet. It can't run forever without refills of love. Also, gasoline had been outlawed on most planets now, seen as deeply archaic and bad for the environment, which is what had made it so irresistible to our teenage selves who didn't think we would live long enough for a future. In the long term, I had to switch from gasoline to renewable energy that didn't deplenish or exhaust me every time I used it. And I had to find that renewable energy for myself, and no one else. Our honeymoon hadn't been much sweeter, despite the name, despite the biff bang pow and tickle. Earth's lunar moon hadn't really been ready for visitors, and our bridal suite was as small and tacky as you'd expect from Earthlings. All there was to do was eat the chicken Apollo dishes at the Apollo restaurant and drive for miles and miles in our moon buggies.
Ha!
I remember Brogan saying,
The Neil Armstrong Hotel? Who's he then? Just some Earth guy who went to the gym and did weight? I bet my arms are stronger than his.
And he'd wrestled the entire hotel staff before I'd had a chance to stop and explain to him who Neil Armstrong was. He never was one for learning about other planets and their histories, was Brogan. We got the whole thing cheap through Brogan's contacts, and it had been presented to me at the time as a very generous gesture. I'd grown very angry when I realised just how cheap it was, I remembered. A full-blown temper tantrum. Security had been called when I began to attack some sort of footprint that had been left on the moon in the 20th century. It was almost a sacred monument on the moon. It just looked like a footprint to me, evidence of how little cleaning had actually been done on the surface, including our hotel. You see, I was desperate to have evidence that I was special, so that I could feel special, and that trip, the most important of my life, was so unspecial. The hotel had been so overbooked that there were never enough staff on hand to look after a needy Belobrat and Agrosian who wanted the universe, and everyone around us had been in a really bad mood at us and our noisy outbursts, which had made me edgy. I'd wanted everything to be just so at the start of our married life, but it really got to me when our rooms, our food, our surroundings had been so poor. I had been so desperate to get married that I put all my hopes into our wedding day and the week that followed. I hadn't known then, had been too young to realise that it was the marriage that mattered, the partnership, not the day that marked the start of it. A true partnership is laughing over things that go wrong that you couldn't control, and making fun of each other and yourselves every time life tries to strip you of your dignity, as it so often did, to help each other have fun, despite the obstacles and challenges. It isn't getting mad at things outside your control and blaming your other half for the fact that your half of the partnership still feels so hollow and empty inside. After all, no one can make you feel whole. They can only help you make yourself whole again. And if anyone thinks they can make you whole, they are probably a Belobrat too. Not that we didn't have fun. I remembered every last passionate embrace, every last smooch, every sexual encounter, every single moment that had made my drab and dreary world feel exciting, dangerous, naughty. I had grown so tired of being well behaved, it was good to let it all out. I had built up so much pent-up anger and aggression at how the universe had treated me, and I had managed to let it all out of my system in one great long fiery embrace of longing and lust. I had been at it like Habridats that week, spending more time in bed that trip than I spent the rest of the year. Each of us so desperate to lose ourselves in the other and become whole. For a while it worked too. There were moments when I would just have to glance at the other side of the bed, and Brogan would know exactly what I wanted, and from which of his heads I wanted it from, or the hugs from a being with 3 arms are to die for. I had never been hugged the same way, and probably never would again. There were moments when I was being cuddled in bed after a marathon making out session, where I felt like the most special being in the universe. No, I would never forget the way I'd once felt so alive with my partner in crime, or the way that it used to be unconditional. Before it wasn't. I had grown so accustomed to seeing myself through my lover's eyes, and the way they had built me up into someone who actually mattered, but it had broken my heart when I was knocked, kicking and screaming, off the pedestal I'd been put on. Suddenly nothing I could do was right. I was too loud, or quiet, or neat, or fussy, or helpful, or helpless. It had started off slow, the tiniest of itty-bitty criticisms scattered randomly across the overwhelming torrent of love and happiness. By the end it was the praise and love that was scattered randomly across a series of attacks. The change had been so slowly, though, so imperceptibly small, that I hadn't noticed until it happened. And each time it happened, it made me mad, as I fought back against those old familiar feelings of not being good enough, that the universe was against me, that yet again something and someone I loved was being torn away from me against my wishes. I used to think that Brogan got off on making me angry, that he provoked my temper just to watch me explode, to feel as alive as I did, which made me even madder, that I was being manipulated and pushed to extremes on someone else's whims. That I was being hurt, just for the sake of someone enjoying hurting me. In the end, I lost control of my anger so many times that I scared myself, as well as him.
How can such aggression come from someone so little, fluffy and cute?
He used to ask, apparently oblivious to how much of that anger he had provoked in me with his comments. Then one day I realised, it wasn't that he wanted me to get angry, it was that he didn't know any better how to stop me, to calm me down. This was the way he had been brought up, with relationships a competition for attention, and admirers treated as a mirror so he could bask in his own reflection. The Belobrat wasn't doing this to me out of spite or hatred or anger, but because that was the way they'd been taught to show love, and they didn't understand that there were other ways to express it. This was someone who didn't know how to offer gentle, comforting love, who only knew different levels of fiery passion, and that wasn't enough to sustain a warm, loving relationship. Instead of feeling warm and toasty, the way we both wanted, we got burnt instead. Every time something went wrong, we ended up taking it out on the other, through anger, even though that anger took different forms inside both of us. Gradually I began to realise that this fire was dangerous, that it destroyed life, even though it had once seemed to give it. I began to see that, even though this was a person I had chosen to get together with, so we could destroy the universe and set it alight to rebuild it better, we were really only destroying each other and ourselves. Meanwhile, the universe just carried on not caring about either of us still, staying stubbornly, unbendingly the same as we got older and wilder and more out of control. So slowly, imperceptibly, against every instinct I had to cling on to love, I learned to let it go, to right us both in the storms of our lives before we drowned each other, to find forgiveness rather than stay alert for reasons to blame. I was not there yet, I knew. I was still drowning, finding water in my lungs here, once there had been a fire, as I sought to extinguish it all. I realised that I might never get where I needed to be to heal. This meeting was, I knew, the real test, to see if I had truly learned my lessons, or if we were just going to end up making each other's ticking time bombs explode again. It had been a wrench to be alone at first. Still was, I corrected myself. It was tough going through life feeling like a half again, instead of a whole, even if that whole had been a whole lot of problems. Cutting myself off from the source of so much of my fuel had left me so very cold and empty, feeling as if nothing could ever fill the void inside me. But then that's the trouble with relationships. When they break, they tend to break whole. Suddenly, there's not usually the tailing off or cooling period to match the slow speed with which you started, so by the time you reach the end of the road, you had imagined you were only halfway through at most, and you had plenty of time to enjoy everything you had planned for in the future. But sometimes you didn't get to have a future. Sometimes all you get is a broken past and a bunch of ghosts of what might have been. But at least in the present, I was closer to the tranquil, tropical seas I needed to float on than I'd ever been, shooting fire into a sun that burned me back. I was stronger now, knew myself better. Ironically, I thought to myself, I would cope much better now if put back in the same predicament again. And isn't that what healing truly is? After all, here I was, facing up to my past, that was now literally across the table from me, in a way I could never have done a short time before.
I said I hate that new age woo-woo stuff,
said Brogan, repeating himself, and shocking me out of my thoughts as I realised I had covered all this ground in but an instant.
The Rationarts don't know what they're talking about. Not like Belobrats. We know all there is to know about the universe. Why don't we just ask us if we want to know stuff? It's like the Dewsbury Giants trying to collect all the recipes in the universe when we make the best food fit for 3 mouths. Or the Beckyons pretending we know about science when we could have invented everything they could and better, but we just never got round to it because we were too busy running the universe properly. I bet I could do this paperwork in a jiffy too, not like these Camalosians. I bet we'd have defeated the Grosians in every battle you could name as well. I only care about my home planet, me. No need for all that spiritual in the air woo-woo stuff. I wouldn't know the first thing about it.
I nodded, smiling to myself. Oh, Brogan, I've come so far and changed so much, and you are still the same, I thought. There's nothing in the universe you could say that would surprise me anymore.
If you say so,
I added for good measure, just to show that I wasn't going to rise to the bait. I only wanted peace. My warring days were over now. I had given up trying to reform him, as I had once wanted to so badly, to get to the kind, generous soul I knew was in there somewhere, but was so well buried under layers of insecurity, inner hatred and arrogance. I'd retired from that job, and just found myself watching on the sidelines instead, glad he wasn't my responsibility. Just then the Meckion waitress walked past with a drink.
Hey there, good looking.
Brogan flashed the Meckion waitress a smile.
I'm a Gemini, or at least 2 of my heads are. The 3rd is an Aries. What year did you win the Miss Universe contest? Oh, you're definitely a 10. And I'm a 50.
He lowered his voice.
Just so you know, this is my ex I'm with. I'm single and ready to mingle. Like to see my dingle jingle?
I saw the Meckion look him up and down and try to puzzle out the logic of these numbers, but finding none, she was just confused.
Does not compute,
She said.
for all sorts of reasons.
I went back to her work.
Hey, don't go.
Called Brogan,
We can get together for a foursome. Just you and me, baby.
but she wasn't listening.
leave the poor thing alone.
I said, trying not to get angry on her behalf. One of Brogan's heads pouted, while the other 2 grinned back at me, evilly. That was all for my benefit, I supposed. More games, more mind dances, relationship chess. Brogan never realised that I was playing a simpler, far more one-dimensional sort of a game. Snakes and ladders, that was me, going up and down on life's board and reacting instantly with happiness or sadness as I rose or fell. I was a creature of instinct. I didn't work well with all that sacrifice this piece and go backwards to go forwards nonsense. Anyway, I didn't want to win the whole board and demolish the opposition and win a war. That wasn't my goal at all. That was a Belobrat one. I just wanted peace, to get to the other side of the board in one piece without being sent back to the start again. That's the problem when your husband has three heads, though. There's always something cooking in the extra one, I find. It's always one step ahead of the others, alert, looking for weakness, for a way to win at all costs. What Brogan didn't know, what he had never yet realised, because he was a Belobrat, was that all he had to do to find love, real, true love, was to put down the traps and decoys and run across the game with open arms, to speak from the heart. And of course Belobrats had such trouble finding out what their hearts truly wanted, given that they had three of them inside, all beating in different rhythms. No wonder he was so confused. Suddenly so was I. I'd loved him for so long, then hated him for a little while, but I'd never felt pity for him before. This was new.
Oh, Brogan,
I said, more to myself than him.
how did we end up here, outside these lawyers' offices?
I think you used the Z-4 FGHT freeway, then turned left onto the Z road.
Chimed in the Mekion waitress, before we both glared at her, and she walked off again, muttering something about ungrateful customers who probably wouldn't tip.
We once had such a bright future together.
I said.
We could have had it all. Now I'm reduced to watching you flirt with waitresses and trying to make me jealous.
Brogan snorted.
I suppose you blame me for that. You're using your angry tone again.
I bit my tongue. I was trying very hard not to.
I am an Agrosian. We were bred for war across several centuries. It's hard to overcome that in a few years. Besides, you knew that when you married me. You said you liked it when I was fiery. Fires don't have an off switch,
I said.
You shouldn't have stood so close to the flames if you weren't ready for them, or poured so much fuel
On top. I was getting angry again. I had to check myself. This was so hard. I still felt the friction every time the two of us got together, shedding electric sparks into the air.
Maybe.
He said suddenly.
But you didn't need to, actually set yourself alight like that to prove a point.
He looked at the bald patch at the back of my head and sighed.
That's my ball.
It's not my fault you're such an arsonist.
I yelled. All the other aliens in the room turned to look at me. Some passing Habridats ran under a table, squeaking. Somehow Brogan had done it again, switched the table so that he looked like the same calm, rational one out of nowhere, as if distancing himself from having anything to do with the fire at all, when he was in full view, pouring fuel on it. It always made me mad when he did that. As much as he tried to act shocked and horrified by my outburst, I could also see the smirk on his third face where he didn't think I could see it. That free-faced son of a hairy argibraffe. No, wait, that was just another trap I was falling down, like the snakes on my board game. But I remembered what my Mauritian therapist had told me. I didn't have to play this game if I didn't want to.
Hold your tongue.
Hissed Brogan.
Not you.
He snapped at the Mekion waitress, who was walking past just then, puzzled and physically holding hers. Looked for a safe subject, I told myself. One of the ones you prepared before you came in for moments like this.
How are my Belobrat in-laws?
I asked. It had been interesting having Belobrat in-laws. They were always interfering, thinking they knew best. But they doted on their son, I quickly realised, and just wanted the best for him. No one was ever going to think that Brogan was as special as they clearly did, and I always felt as if I was falling short.
They're fine.
Brogan said.
They miss you.
He said, a bit too quickly, before regretting it.
Well, they miss us. As a couple. How are my Agrosian outlaws?
He asked.
All the usual.
I said.
Intense. I miss you too.
They really had as well. I'd been so surprised. They'd been so angry when I first got into my relationship with Brogan, then angry when we ran off together, then even angrier when we emigrated. But now they were angry we were breaking up. Angry was their natural state, though, I supposed. I'd been surprised just how well Brogan had got on with them, though. Once they'd stopped interrogating him, they liked him more than they had me, I think, which at the time, I admit, had made me angry.
I'm truly sorry,
I said suddenly, the dam breaking as more memories returned to me in waves. The time I ate my mother-in-law's hat because it was prettier than mine. The time I fed my father-in-law's canary to our pet piranha because it was getting on my nerves. The time I was arrested for being a drunken disorderly in charge of an out-of-control drinks trolley during our anniversary get-together as a family. I suddenly saw the shame in all these things that, whether provoked or not, were unforgivable.
For what?
Asked Brogan.
All of it.
I said quickly.
Everything I ever got wrong or did without thinking, or happened because I got triggered by something you said. I only wanted to be of service to you.
The Mechion waitress came over looking eager.
No,
I said, shooing her.
I mean a different kind of service.
I turned back to Brogan.
It's not easy living in times of peace when your whole ancestry has been built for war. But I am trying.
Sometimes you're very trying.
Brogan flashed me that grin, which set me off again.
Let me give you a tip.
I said. The Mechion waitress rushed over eagerly.
Not you.
I said, and she walked off shamefaced.
The tip is, I think you're supposed to say sorry too at this point.
I said to Brogan.
But I'm perfect, baby.
My ex flashed me his teeth.
I've been to anger management classes.
I snapped.
I've learnt where I went wrong. But you never went to narcissism classes.
I'm too cute for therapy.
Brogan said offhandedly, as if everybody knew that the two were mutually exclusive.
Too cool for school. Besides, I'm rich. Who needs to change anything about yourself when you're as rich as what I am? I'm the person other people want to be.
He grinned his way around the restaurant. Not that anyone was taking the blindest bit of notice. No, I thought to myself, you were too hot to be cool, too intense to make sense, not too rich to stop being a bitch. I sighed.
We're both adults now. There must be a way to talk sensibly about what happened to us without hurting or blaming the other. Of coming to terms with the past without leaving it all behind. Of revisiting the smokescreen of the past without using it as a hand grenade. Of turning off the engine without damaging the vehicle. Of going cold turkey without provoking each other's fire. Of finishing the game in an honourable draw.
Brogan looked surprised.
You really have changed.
He whistled.
What was the name of that therapist again?
Dr. Migraine.
I said, fishing a card out of my handbag.
He's very good, very non-judgmental, like most Malaysian arts.
Brogan passed the card between all three heads, without any of them really seeing it, before pocketing it.
Thank you,
He said, before dropping his voice.
He doesn't really shrink heads, does he? I would hate it if mine stopped being all the same size.
I laughed, involuntarily. My husband had spent our entire time so worried about what other people thought about him, and the way he looked, it was comical. It had been one of our big differences, as I not cared one jot for anyone's thought about us except us. Somehow we both managed to pin this on the other as being a sign of intense arrogance. Brogan looked hurt at my laughter.
I'm sorry.
I said.
No, he won't shrink your heads. Mine still looks like the same, doesn't it?
He peered closely, with all 6 eyes.
Sort of.
He admitted.
Your body looks exactly the same, but there's something behind your eyes that's different.
As we change how we see the world,
I said.
So it changes the way we see it.
I'm glad you've gone back to your usual shade of red.
Brogan said falteringly.
That's when I knew it was truly over, when you changed colour. It broke my heart when you turned yellow and then blue. At least when you were stripy, I knew I still had a chance. Then when there was no red left, I knew all the passion had gone. That's when I knew I had to let you go.
My heart skipped a beat. So that's why he callously told me he'd had enough and got rid of me. Grateful as I'd sort of been at the time, after so long of trying to make my mind up whether to stay or not. All this time I'd assumed that Brogan hadn't even noticed my different colouring, so wrapped up as he'd been in himself, and I hadn't bothered to tell him about an Agrosian's frustrating evolutionary trick of mood colour changes, so goodness knows where he'd learnt it from.
It makes it a lot easier to tell when you're in love or not. Other species should be so lucky.
My teachers had told me during Agrosian sex educational class, and we discussed such foreign-sounding subjects as safe sex and safe words, which all sounded completely alien to a bunch of excitable Agrosians. Only this colour scheme hadn't made it easier at all. It had made it harder. Because how could I hide what was in my heart to avoid hurting someone I still sort of loved? I had just hoped he hadn't noticed, given that I couldn't help it. But it turned out that he had.
You knew?
I asked sadly.
Oh, yes.
Said Brogan, filling up his chest as if expecting a pat on the head for working it out.
I mean, it was obvious in other ways too. The colouring just clinched it. You'd given me the cold shoulder for so long, I knew something was up. Literally when it turned blue.
He finally put down the paper he'd been holding as a distraction.
It broke my heart, to be honest, Biff. It felt as if you'd abandoned me. That's when I knew I had to let you go, to see if you would come back to me again, or find love elsewhere. It was for your own good.
Wait,
I said, anger rising in me again.
me abandon you? Why didn't you try to win me back again? Back when I was stripy? Surely that was a sign of how badly I needed you.
Brogan shrugged.
Too much hard work,
He said.
and I didn't know what to do. I'd already given you my best shot, with all of my best chat-up lines. It was like you'd seen through me already, and I was never going to fool you again. If something doesn't work out, then it's best to cut your losses and move on to the next person. I didn't know how you felt about me, and it made me nervous. Plus I was scared of setting off your temper.
He looked up and saw me about to lose my temper all over again, so, partly out of a need to quieten me, but also I hoped out of guilt, he finally uttered what I had come all this way to hear.
I'm sorry.
He said.
You three-headed twonk.
I said, half laughing, half shouting, and confusing everyone in the room who was listening.
I loved you for you. None of that ever fooled me. I knew all that bravado was a facade, and just how unconfident you were. I know my Belobrats. But I loved the real you underneath, who was vulnerable with me, who didn't need to make any of those stupid gestures.
By now I was standing on top of my chair, yelling, and everyone was looking at us. Brogan made to shush me and make me sit down, which I did, reluctantly. He always cared about what other people thought about us, more than he ever cared about what I thought about him, I realised again. I was an instinctive, emotional being, quite happy to live in the moment with my feelings, but Brogan never liked anyone to know how he felt. Not really.
If you wanted to know how I felt, why didn't you just ask me?
Because I was scared of what you'd tell me. I mean, you changed colour. It wasn't hard to work out what you were thinking,
Said Brogan, placing his three arms out palm up in a sign of surrender.
I'm scared of you now.
He added for good measure.
Why would you be scared of did it old me, you silly old I'm so exceptionally did it and then nice.
I said.
That
Said Brogan uncomfortably.
explosion thing you do, it makes me feel like hiding under the table with the club to Habridats.
But you used to like it.
I said. I remembered well how Brogan had once thought my fiery personality was the most special thing about me, how it made him feel alive.
Well, it was you in exploding at the world, yes,
He said.
till those explosions got used on me.
He looked squarely at me, uncomfortably.
But even worse was when I saw you using it on yourself, and I couldn't stop it. I hated seeing you in pain.
But pain's part of life, especially for the Maggrumph.
I said, trying my best not to shout.
Watch it.
Warned Brogan, seeing everyone looking at us.
Not you,
He said to the Nakion waitress, who, puzzled, was now staring at the fish dish she was carrying, in case it was an unexploded bomb. I lowered my voice, but did my best not to lower my boundaries.
I never needed or expected you to stop the pain. That wasn't your job. Your job, I hoped, was to comfort me when I was in it, so I felt less alone.
But I felt alone when you were in pain too.
Said Brogan.
It's not easy being cut off from your warmth, you know. There's usually so much of it.
So your answer to losing my warmth was to make yourself cold.
Brogan shifted in his seat uncomfortably.
I'm sorry.
He said again finally, all three arms folded across his chest.
I should have taken better care of you, and I didn't. I'm not very good at that sort of thing. Never was. Much easier to go back to the flirty and dirty stage than the get to know and go slow stage. Now that I'm brilliant at.
He flashed his teeth at me again.
The get to know you stage. We were together 15 years.
I stammered, before checking myself and pulling out of another argument. Brogan shrugged.
We knew each other backwards.
Apparently not.
He explained Brogan.
Or we would have known better how to look after one another, wouldn't we? Besides, both our species lived for centuries. 15 years is just a drop in the ocean, really. Just one star in the sky that's so full, Why should I dampen your light when you had so many other people to shine it on? Plus it kept shining brighter than mine. I was holding you back.
But you were my whole universe,
I yelled. The Habridats finally ran out of the room, weeping in fear.
Watch your step.
Horn Brogan, in the voice that always made me feel like slapping him on all three faces.
Not you, he
He said to the Mechion waitress, who, puzzled, looked down at her feet.
when you left I had no one.
I continued.
No, said
Brogan quietly.
You had yourself. I was your black hole. I was sucking the life out of you. I could see how hard you were trying not to erupt, and nothing I could do seemed to stop that. So how do you stop the tectonic plates moving that causes the magma? You take one of the plates away, and then you hide all the plates so they don't break against your head during a fight. I'm sorry, Biff, but what else could I do?
But what about all the stalking?
I said.
The private detectives? Why didn't you just say goodbye and leave it at that?
I wanted to know how you were, to check you were safe. Oh, you knew about that?
Brogan's jaw dropped.
Those detectives weren't exactly subtle.
I said.
Oh, they thought I couldn't see them camped out on my lawn, but then as they were Belobrats, they probably thought they camouflaged themselves really well. I used to feed them false information to see what reaction I'd get from them. The people I was seeing, the messages I was leaving, it was all put on for your benefit. I once went out for dinner with my Agrosian girlfriends just to see who was following us. I had a great time pretending I had a string of lovers all around the universe, a boy on every planet.
Brogan's eyes goggled and nearly came out of his head.
You mean all that was a lie? A front?
I nodded.
If you knew I wanted you back so badly, then why didn't you tell me?
Because I was scared of what you'd tell me.
I confessed.
Because Belobrats don't change colour, and I could never tell what you were thinking. Ever. Not behind all that veneer of confidence and ego and bluster. You told me that you could get someone better so many times. I believed you. Oh, Biff,
Said Brogan.
but who would I find better than you?
There was a long pause.
Why are we here now, in the Camalosian lawyer's office?
I complained. Then softer.
Is this where we were always meant to end up? Did we miss a turning on the way? Did all the roads we could have taken inevitably lead here?
You're the one with the woo-woo therapist, you tell me.
Brogan said.
I've come to realise something. The reason I wanted us to come here, I secretly knew the Camalosians would take this long, that we could have one last chat, to see if we could make it work. There's nobody else out there like you, in the whole wide universe. When I got mad at you for turning up so late, and forgot that's what we were meant to be doing, I thought it was our last chance to get it together, and you'd ruined it on purpose.
Oh, Brogan,
I said.
haven't you realised yet? Doing things on purpose is a Belobrat privilege. The Agrosians don't think, plan ahead and strategise, they react in the moment. All I was doing was reflecting you, as all the Agrosians do. If you'd shown me kindness and warmth and love, you'd have had that returned to you in spades. But I don't get to choose what gets held up to the mirror. If you show me anger and fear and paranoia, that's what you get back. I can't help myself. The Agrosians aren't stable enough to be their true selves. We've been bred for wrong purposes for so many centuries, we're not terribly sure who we are. Not like Belobrats.
Oh, Biff,
Said my ex.
haven't you realised yet? Belobrats don't know who they are either. Not really, not deep down. Everything is so shallow with us, and we depend so much on what other people think of us to give us value. Every time you believe the worst of me, I ended up believing it of myself.
My head swung as I tried to take it all in.
And you didn't hate me.
I said.
Not even when you told me I was a useless girlfriend and you'd find someone better without even trying.
No,
Said Brogan.
you mean you didn't hate me? Not even when you said you wished it had been me you'd set alight, but even with 3 heads and 3 hearts I didn't have any sense of either.
No.
I said, remembering when I'd said it, and that I never really meant it, not even at the time.
No, I'm not sure our species combination really makes for a good relationship.
Brogan smiled.
Depends how much you value intensity.
He said.
At least we have that. Sometimes I see these couples who have absolutely nothing in common, living out their quiet lives of desperation, and I wonder how they ever got it together at all. At least people could see why we got together. At least we had chemistry. But not all chemical reactions are good.
Brogan dropped to his knees.
Please, there's still time. I can't let you go. If I do, I'll fall.
It was too late, I realised. This was something I'd wanted to hear for so long, but now I got so used to not hearing it, I had moved on, and come to accept that this wasn't right for me, or for him.
Please let me go.
I said quietly, looking into his ever-intense purple eyes.
If you don't, then we'll both fall.
If you'd loved me, you would never let me go.
Brogan said.
If you'd loved me, you would never force me to stay with you.
I said.
I mean, my hand was always outstretched to help you, and always will be. You didn't need to chain it to you to keep me there.
If you love me, you'll let me clear up your dishes,
said our Mekion waitress, who reached out for our plates. We shushed her and both became quiet, suddenly shy that someone might be listening into our private conversation, even though, I guessed, we were probably the talk of the room by now.
So where does this leave us?
I stammered.
I'm not sure I could go through all that again. I want to end up back here. Probably.
I'm seeing someone new,
blurted out Brogan suddenly. His head's turned several different colours, and he flashed a guilty smile at me. All right, that was a shock. Though I had been half expecting it. My former husband had always been the sort of person who was never apart from anyone for very long, and hated his own company. Like most Belobrats, he needed someone to show off to. The fact laid out in front of me so bare like that still shook me.
Oh,
I said.
Good. Good for you. Is she nice?
Why did I just say that, I thought to myself. Of course she wasn't going to be nice. She was with Brogan. I thought hard about whether to tease him or not, and figured I would anyway.
Is she another Agrosian?
I asked, as innocently as I could. I knew about Brogan's fetish for red, cute, angry and passionate beings.
Ah,
confessed the second, more mature head of Brogan, and getting a dark look from the other two.
that is to say, we haven't quite got that far yet. We've never actually met or seen each other, but we've been communicating a lot. Long conversations about everything, and nothing like you and I used to have. And it's going well, so far. And she's not irritating the heck out of me anyway.
Oh, I
Said.
That's nice.
My mouth managed to say, but that wasn't what my brain or my heart was saying at all. Despite everything, despite all that I had gone through, despite the logical part of my brain knowing that I had done the right thing, I still missed that fire and hated the idea of anyone else being warmed by it. How ridiculous, I thought to myself, that I should feel jealous of something I no longer wanted. But then an Agrosian was still a ball of emotions and contradictions after all. It was genetics and breeding. I heard my Malaysian therapist whispering in my ear, encouraging me to let it go, that what was in front of me wasn't for me, and that it wouldn't be in front of me for much longer. Besides, I knew where this road always ended up, what would happen to me if I started across the board again from the beginning, all those snakes that were lurking, waiting for me amongst all the ladders.
How about you?
Brogan asked hesitatingly.
Anyone else?
Nothing serious.
I admitted. Actually, I have been chatting to people, but more at the bequest of my therapist, who had been worried about me turning into an Agrosian with agoraphobia and trust issues, cut off from the rest of the universe. There had only been one person I had ever felt any of the spark I had once had with Brogan, though, and it was only a spark. That wasn't enough to keep me warm when I was still halfway out in the cold.
How did you meet?
I asked. I knew full well that, behind his facade, Brogan was shy, and so was unlikely to have met anyone in person. As much as he tried to convince me he could pull any girl he wanted from any species in under 5 minutes, in all our time together, the closest I ever saw him pull was that of a muscle.
A universal app called Intergalactic Dating,
He said.
You all get to have pseudonyms, and your letters get sent all over the universe. It's good fun. I wish we'd had it when we were dating.
I remember the early days of our courting when, after a summer romance on the Grozier, Brogan had upped and left and reduced me to dropping letters through a wormhole to get in touch with him.
Oh, I've got that app too.
I said.
That's what I've been using, in fact. Not that I use it much. I mostly talk to this absolute dork who thinks he's funny. His hearts are in the right place.
A sly grin came over Brogan's left head.
Is he another Belobrat?
He asked, not at all innocently. I cringed inwardly. At least when I'd asked him, I tried to be subtle, but then tact was never one of Brogan's strong points. It was an obvious guess anyway. He knew my weakness for tall, dark, handsome, opinionated, confident, schizophrenic and exotic aliens.
Why, yes,
I said as nonchalantly as I could, and as if struggling to remember.
I think he is.
Brogan smiled a big broad grin.
Well, with that awkwardness out of the way, I'm going to text this new girl right now. You watch how quickly I can get a message back from her. She's crazy about me. Besotted.
You would as well, I thought, even though this was the last place you should be doing exactly that. I didn't think that vulnerability I had just seen was going to last very long somehow. It never did with Brogan. I laughed inwardly. He was showing off again, and despite everything, still seemed proud of his behaviour. Well, two can play at that game. I got out my phone too, and connected to the Camalosian universal settings. That was, as it turned out, exceptionally complicated. I had to set up an account using a 130-character password, nominate questions and answers about another 130 characters and works of fiction I could use in case my account was ever hacked in the future. Add the names of my ancestors going back 6 generations, enter a whole paragraph of text to prove I wasn't a robot, then a further paragraph to prove that I wasn't just a mechion acting like a robot, and finally tick 42 photographs that included anything involving atomic numbers between 1 and 27. By the time I had done all that, Brogan was sitting back smugly in his chair.
All done,
He said.
Now I just need to sit back and wait. It won't be long. She dotes on me, this girl.
Even though I knew it was all said to rile me, in my head my laugh got bigger. This was so Brogan, trying to win a competition no one else had entered. I'm probably coming in last if I knew him. Well, it was a good reminder of why it had all failed so spectacularly between us, I thought to myself. One last crazy spin of a dice before we were out of each other's lives for good. Slowly I scrolled through my phone, going past all my universal social media as enjoyed by different planets. Clandesprodic Cave Book, Mecha TikTok, Deustagram, the Glabdahada interplanetary tweeting system, some random Camalosian app where every message you sent had to be at least 1 billion characters long, some daft earth thing called Facebook, until I got to the app for Intergalactic Dating.
Hey,
I said.
I just got a message too, from that guy I was telling you about. He says he's having a great time lounging on the beach with a Gentile lady with huge standing and being waited on hand and foot. Well, I guess that beats being in a Camalonian's office about to break up with your life partner, doesn't it?
Brogan went red. No, actually only his middle head went red. The other two turned roulette. I knew that look. It was what happened whenever he had been found out about something. As if someone had just punctured a lie and he didn't yet know how to cover it. What now, I wondered? What was he keeping from me? Surely there were no secrets left the way this meeting had turned out.
That's a coincidence,
He murmured.
Oh, I don't think you know him, even if he is a Belobrat. And you all seem to be related, or at least know each other. He signs all his messages Randy, but something tells me that isn't his real name, more a description. Not least because all Belobrat names begin with B.
Brogan turned a really funny colour at this, somewhere on the spectrum between pink and grey. I still couldn't work him out. He'd started this whole thing seeing other people thing, hadn't he? He couldn't very well be jealous of me now. I was enjoying the way the tables had turned, though. I was all too used to Brogan getting the better of me, of laying traps for me to fall into. Well, this time it was my turn, and it wasn't premeditated the way it would be for him, just the universe working a few karmic things out, as my Mauritian therapist would no doubt later tell me.
I'm just going to send him a quick reply now, telling him who I'm with,
I said, hearing Brogan's phone lightly ping. I watched all of his 6 eyes light up as he hurriedly scrolled past and put his phone away.
Anyway,
He mumbled, flashing that crooked smile at me again.
back to us.
Something wasn't right, though. It certainly wasn't like Brogan to ignore a message, particularly if it enabled him to score a point somewhere down the line. Hang on a minute, I thought to myself. The timing of that ping couldn't just be a coincidence. There was something else too, something that had been nagging away at me ever since I started receiving those messages. A sense of déjà vu, of falling back down an old familiar snake just when I thought I'd found a ladder. Wait, I said.
I know those faces. Was that you that just messaged me? Was that you that was flirting with me this whole time? Promising to show me the universe? Getting my sympathy because of being unlucky in love?
Brogan looks at me sheepishly and grins, the smile spreading across all 3 faces.
Baby?
he confessed.
You mean you were spying on me?
I cried, my voice rising again.
Sit down.
Hissed Brogan.
Not you,
He said to the Mechion waitress, whose concern was trying to put ice cubes in the bowl of soup she was taking past us. I carried on, distraught. I never thought even Brogan could have sunk this slow.
The detectives weren't enough, so you had to steal one last bit of happiness I found for myself, on my own. You had to make up some dotty character who was totally my type to sweep me off my feet, so you could have me all over again. You had to make yourself out to be the dish of the day when you had already given me indigestion. You had to tie yourself up in my heartstrings all over again, after I'd only just disentangled you.
Dish of the day? Inquired the waitress, walking over. Not you! We both yelled at her, and I felt bad.
Sorry, love,
I said more kindly.
he's my ex.
I whispered.
Ex coming up.
She smiled and ran off.
Scramble.
I mouthed to Brogan, pointing at my head and the waitress.
No problem.
Came the cry from the kitchen.
Oh no.
I groaned. I've forgotten how good a Mechion's hearing can be. Now I'm getting a whole plate of eggs I can't eat.
Anyway, where were we? Oh yes, I was getting mad at you for following me on that app.
No,
Said Brogan hastily, fishing his phone out of his pocket again.
How would I ever have known that was you? I thought he was talking to someone new who just reminded me of you. After all, you're called yourself Ban, not Biff.
He looked confused and sceptical.
Unless you were using it to spy on me.
Wait,
I said, beginning to laugh.
you mean we've both just been chatting each other up, all over again? For real?
Brogan began to laugh too. It was the first time I'd heard him laugh in ever so long. And I felt the rust and dust of all that had gone between us fall away. A glorious sound I never thought I would hear again.
I did think there was something familiar about it all, but I hadn't got a clue it was you. I mean, you said you were 7'2".
You said all your three heads were good looking.
I giggled.
You know, I always thought the one on the right was your most handsome.
You said you won awards.
I did.
I said.
Well, an award. Third in the glove to hold it and spoon race me. How about you? You said you won a beauty competition.
Brogan looked sheepish all over again.
Oh, I didn't actually say I'd won it yet. Surely it's only a matter of time for someone this handsome.
No wonder I felt a spark.
I said.
I mean, we were a raging inferno once, but there was always going to be something left. It was the same old fire, just a little smaller.
Brogan spoke more quietly as he studied me.
Maybe that spark will never die.
I hope not.
I said.
Not completely. I just don't want the fire ever getting that high again, so that it burns us.
Brogan smiled.
I guess it hadn't burnt itself out after all. Still got it, baby.
Brogan giggled, flashing his teeth.
Wait,
He said, a thought just occurring to him.
did you call me an absolute dork a minute ago?
I giggled back.
I was right, wasn't I? You are a dog.
Brogan looked shocked.
Oh, don't push such faces, I said. I've said worse things to you than that.
Yes,
Said Brogan.
and I remember them all. Actually, I'm quite surprised some of your comments didn't make me change colour too, they hurt so much.
I'm really sorry.
I blurted out again as the tables turned once more.
I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted you to stop hurting me. That's all this was. I couldn't stand your sauce sometimes, the way you talked to me.
We have a special on sauce today.
Started the Mechion waitress, who walked up to us, saw the look on our faces, and walked the other way.
I never meant to hurt you too,
Brogan said.
but you were hurting me. I just wanted you to be pleased to be around me, to pay me some compliments. It's good for a Belobrat self-image.
We have a special on compliments too.
Continued the Mechion waitress, and we both yelled at her,
Go away!
She glared at us and left. Brogan continued.
Maybe two people as damaged as us shouldn't be with anyone again, ever. Maybe it's kinder to be alone.
Maybe two people as damaged as us need other people more than anyone else.
I said.
To help us get out of our own head. The heads.
I said, looking back at him.
I'm sorry for everything. I never meant it to get this far.
Brogan flashed his teeth at me again.
Well, I guess a late apology is better than no apology at all. You apologise first. I guess that means I win.
He laughed loudly, stupidly proud of a nothing result, the way he always was. That sort of thing always used to rile me and rub my fur up the wrong way. But not this time. I coughed and glared at him. Sheepishly Brogan looked down through the paper he'd been pretending to read since I got there, and yet was still upside down, I noticed.
All right,
He said,
I'm sorry too. Really sorry. I genuinely wasn't trying to press your buttons or make you angry. I never wanted to do anything to hurt you. It's just that being my natural self always seemed to make you angry. I didn't know how to change that. Honestly, I still don't know how to change that. We just always seemed to end up in a cycle of hurting each other without meaning to, until we ended up here.
That was about the most grown-up sentence I'd ever heard Brogan say.
Why can't you speak like that more often?
Often I asked him.
It would have helped a lot.
Because I'm safest with what I know.
He said uncomfortably.
I'm not good at being vulnerable. I don't have three heads or telling each other they're brilliant for nothing, you know. I have to live in fantasy because the reality hurts too much. Without meaning to, you kept puncturing that fantasy, intruding with your directness and honesty and temper.
Temper.
I yelled. The room looked round at us again. I could see the Mechion waitress desperately trying to look the other way.
That temper.
Grinned Brogan, and we laughed.
We just weren't a good fit.
He continued.
That doesn't mean that you were a bad person, or that I was a bad person, or that we had nothing in common, or that we didn't love one another. If a Mechion was here, they would say that it was a mistake of chemicals that caused a wrong reaction after starting off so well. Or one of your woo-woo narration arts would probably say we were born under a bad star, or something. Of course, if a Clandesprog was here, they'd be saying something nice right now. I'd have her plenty more fish in the sea.
Fish is off,
Said the Mechion waitress glaring at us.
I hope that doesn't make us chicken.
Continued Brogan, trying to ignore her.
chicken's off too.
The waitress.
It's not like we gave up without a fight. Well, quite a few fights really. It's just that what the universe always said was true. The Belobrat and the Maggrumph don't really belong together.
Well,
Said sighing.
I guess neither of us really liked being told what to do, did we? We had to give it a try. We were quids in there too for a while too, I thought.
Squid's off.
Added the waitress.
I guess it's all right.
I said, holding all three of his hands in mine, and feeling as if I had learnt something at last.
Things don't have to last forever to be beautiful, or for it to have been love. And just because we don't have a future doesn't mean that I will ever want to forget the past.
Brogan was about to say something, but we were interrupted by the secretary of our Camalosian lawyer, who told us that she was just finishing off the paperwork, and we could go meeting now, one by one. Well, technically she told us that our adjournment had been concluded, that she had ascertained the documentation had been verified and ratified, and would be successfully delivered ere long if we could individually perambulate our physical bodies precipitously in the direction of her administrative office. She scurried off quickly.
I guess this is it.
Said Brogan, flashing a smile at me. After all that, you look sad.
We might not ever see each other again after today.
I guess not.
I said.
But if you're ever passing Agrosia, you can always come and look me up.
Say,
He smiled gratefully.
if your path ever crosses Helios,
At least one long dance ended on a good note.
I said.
After all that, more than it did the last time.
I bit my lip.
I really am sorry for everything. And I wish you well.
I really am sorry too,
Smiled Brogan.
for all of it. May you have a great life and find the person you truly deserve, who brings out only the best in you.
You too.
I say, smiling.
You were pretty good together. Most of the time, anyway. It was pretty special too. So the next chapter must be even more special.
Hey, I was amazing.
Said Brogan, smiling at the memories.
You weren't so bad yourself either.
There was a twinkle in his eye, so I knew he was joking with me one last time.
One last kiss.
I asked and reached up for it.
One for the road.
I added, heading for a second head.
And one more so that the third doesn't feel left out.
I added, going for the last. Brogan shut his eyes, and so did I. Just for a second there we remembered what it had been like when we had first met, when all our roads could have gone anywhere, before we crashed and burned and ended up here.
We had fun though, didn't we?
Brogan had opened his eyes, and so did I. A more worried look came over his middle head.
It was worth doing, wasn't it? being together?
Always.
I said.
When it worked, it was the best fun I ever had, with or without my clothes on. Just because it didn't work out didn't mean I never loved you.
Nor are you.
Brogan smiled, broadly this time, with all three mouths and 6 eyes.
Even if we can never be lovers again, I'm glad we're no longer enemies. Being friends with you is still pretty special. The universe only got one Biff after all.
Same here,
I said.
The universe only got one Brogan. No one in the universe knows me as well as you do, or you as well as me. That's reason enough to stay friends.
Well, you know what we say.
Smiled Brogan.
4 heads are better than one. Goodbye, my Biff. Thank you for everything.
Goodbye, Brogan.
I said.
Thank you for everything too.
We embraced one last time and finally, reluctantly, parted. Somehow I felt better now, with all the things that had been left unsaid, finally spoken. They sounded better out in the open than they had circling in my head for the past year or so. Unlike my ex, I only have the one head to keep these thoughts in after all.
You go ahead, I
Said to Brogan as I walked to the counter.
I'll finish up here. One last treat. Besides, you know how I love to get the last word.
Surprisingly, Brogan didn't argue. He just grinned at me, nodded his thanks, and walked off. And I stayed in the corridor, watching him walk up the stairs and out of my life, eyeing up all the hot young things he saw along the way. The clandestine in the tuxedo who was in charge greeted me happily as I walked over to him. "Your bill, madam. It's already been paid for." "No," I said.
It can't have been. I've got up to pay it specially. It's a nice gesture.
"Well, it looks as if your table partner sneaked out here even earlier to pay for it, as an equally nice gesture." I laughed. "But how can he have done? He never left his seat the whole time we were here. I hadn't even ordered." The waiter checked the list. "Nevertheless, this is exactly what you ordered, just as he told us you would. Your table companion paid for it all before you had even got here. It's all been cleared."
That Belobrat.
I laughed to myself.
He made sure he got the last word after all.
Confused, I said.
Well, at least can I give a tip?
The waiter grinned. "That's been taken care of too, particularly for our new waitress from Mekion. The customer said he knew one or other of you were going to start shouting and worry the poor thing, so she should have some extra compensation." He handed me the receipt to show me, which, being a Camalosian receipt, was twice as big as I was, despite our simple meals. Nevertheless, the waiter was quite right. Everything had been paid for, right down to the refill of Camalosian coffee and the accidental order of scrambled eggs I hadn't meant. Nodding, I put my purse away. And there it was. Just when I thought I had come to the end and seen it all, that I could write off this relationship as being poisonous and better out of my life. There it was, a little reminder of the gallant gentleman I had fallen for, that was still lurking behind that arrogant exterior. A last act of kindness to end an era of accidental cruelty, to leave me guessing at what the reality was after all. Another snake on my way across the board, another slug of petrol to keep the engine ticking over, or another note in the symphony that might one day be finished properly. I still couldn't tell. But then that had been our relationship all over, I realised. I had never been able to work out where it was headed next, and neither of us had been in control. All I knew was at this stage of what we were, that over now at last. Picking up my things and shaking my head, I moved on to the lawyer's office to start the rest of my life.